Uh, Hi everyone, and welcome to this Art UK talk from GoMA, the Glasgow Gallery of Modern Art. So my name's Martin McSheaffrey-Craig. I'm the Curator of Art Post 1945 for Glasgow Museums, and my colleague here is Katie Bruce, the Curator Producer, also based at GoMA and part of Glasgow Museums. So we both curate the programme for GoMA, as well as that we look after the collection, which means bringing works into the collection, acquisitions, and making sure that everything's up to date and available on our collections navigator, which you can find online. So for those of you that may be joining from afar and aren't as familiar with GoMA or haven't visited, this is our lovely building here in the heart of the city. GoMA is part of Glasgow Museums, which is one of 9 museums you can visit if you come to Glasgow. This includes Kelvin Grove Museum and Art Gallery, the People's Palace, Riverside, and our open stores, GMRC. GoMA itself opened in 1996 to a bit of controversy. Then in 1996, the current contemporary artists like Douglas Gordon or Christine Borland were getting quite popular, but they weren't selected to be part of the initial display in GoMA. Since then, we've worked hard and we have collected lots of those artists and many more contemporary artists within Glasgow and further afield, and we'll talk about a few of those, but also mainly we'll talk about some of the commissions that happened within the building. We rotate our exhibitions, so we're going to try and focus on things that you will be able to see if you come and visit in the next wee while, as well as maybe giving you a wee flavour of GoMA and what we do. So GoMA has 4 galleries in it, and what we're going to do is we're going to have a wee look at a few examples of some of those galleries and some of the works that have been in them. So let's have a wee look. If I can get the slide to go. There we go. So this is our Gallery 1. It's quite a tight shot. You'll see Gallery 1 in slides in a second, but it's quite a grand space. But this is a show called Devils in the Making, which I curated. It's one of the first shows I curated back in 2015, and the Turner Prize was up in Glasgow, and we were wanting to kind of highlight artists from Glasgow School of Art whilst this was on. Because we've got such a great collection, we can do that and pull from it. Here we've got artist Nick Evans in the foreground, and behind that we've got Martin Boyce. But part of going back into the collection and being one of the first collection shows that I curated and working with Katie and the rest of the team, we realised that we don't really have big bits of sculpture or substantial work by women artists, even though at that time in the building we had a whole gallery dedicated to the second run of shows dedicated to female artists within the collection and new acquisitions, but they were more maybe ephemeral, on paper, AV works, etc. So as we go back and explore the collection through the years, we that also helps set our path and what we are thinking about collecting and going forward to diversify. Gallery 2 we have here, we've got an exhibition called Taste, which is a kind of semi-permanent exhibition that has rotations, and we spoke a wee bit about the controversy when we opened. In this section of this exhibition talks about that a wee bit. We can see some works by Beryl Cook, who was commissioned by the then director of GoMA, and people were quite some people in the art world were a wee bit outraged by Beryl Cook, but then the public loved them, and it's still an ongoing debate and conversation around artists that are maybe not trained in art schools or acquisitions that happen, like who is the collection for. Next to it is Stanley Spencer, painted by Stanley Spencer, and there can be conversations. This exhibition, or part of it, talks a wee bit about the similarities between Spencer and Cook, but why maybe the art world or certain people see one as more than the other. Gallery 4, this is a great exhibition that Katie curated, Domestic Bliss. Again, a kind of semi-permanent show, so we can rotate out with collections. We'll talk about one of those rotations at the back there. You can see a couple of great paintings by Rabia Razi. We'll come back to those later. But Domestic Bliss has lots of layers within it and pulls from various parts of the collection. So when we talk about the collection, it's not GoMA's collection, it's Glasgow Museum's collection. which has been running for quite literally hundreds of years. So we can pull from either the wide range of artworks that were before 1996, from Rembrandts to Warhols, but also the social history collection, transport collection, etc. So one example of this is the Stottsatz glass that you can see in the foreground here, but also just behind there you can see A Yellow Foot by Nicola L. And interestingly, we again, when you explore the collection, it kind of sounds a bit crazy, but we didn't actually know that this work was in the collection because it was essentially registered under furniture. So when we were exploring the stores, and we had a request for information about Nicola L, it was great to get this back out again and get it conserved, and it's now in domestic bliss. So it's a way sometimes how the collection can be explored even if you think you know it really well. Back to Gallery 1 gives you a wee bit more of a sense of the scale of it, and it's really good for commissions or singular pieces of work. This is a big installation by Douglas Gordon, pretty much every film and film work since 1992. This is maybe an example of how we acquire for the collection. So we have, as we said, we curate work exhibitions from the collection, but we also bring in work. So either we work with singular artists to create new shows, or we take in higher shows or traveling shows, etc. And usually when we are working with artists, that's a great time because they have a good connection with the GoMA and Glasgow and the team, and we'll usually try to acquire from one of these. This was a work that had been previously done by Douglas, but he's obviously came from Glasgow and was one of the first Scottish person to win the Turner Prize, and this is almost like an archive of all his works. And then what's interesting about it is it keeps on growing, so we also have kind of a history and a living archive of Douglas's works. So that's great to have that in the collection. And a different view of Gallery 1, so you can see this high domed ceiling. So it is like a old building that's had many different lives, which we do have exhibition in the balconies on. People are often interested in the building and its history. So if you come in, you can see that. But this is a work by Phil Collins. And this is a work that maybe shows how we can collect from works that are commissioned from different things. So this was commissioned for the Commonwealth Games in 2014 by the Common Guild. So it was a big bit of work and a spectacle as part of the Commonwealth Games. A couple of years later, we brought it into the collection and showed it in here in a different setting, but it's also a bit of social history because it kind of talks about commissions that have happened within the city, but also key moments in time like the Commonwealth Games. Gallery 1, this is a show that Katie curated, revisiting the works of Black artists in Scotland through new collecting. This was a mixture of commissions with some money from Art Fund. And this was, again, talking about how we can diversify the collection, but historically as well as contemporary. So there was lots of works bought from artists that have connections with Glasgow and Scotland, as well as commissioning new works by artists. And finally, I don't think we've looked at Gallery 3. So this is Hal Fisher. So it's not just all Glasgow-based works. We do look at international artists, especially if they align with some of the interests that we've been looking at. And we've had a lot of great works about LGBTQI and exploring issues around that from our show called Shout years ago, and continued to collect in that as a strand of collection. So Hal was San Francisco based, but had a seminal work called Gay Semiotics. So we acquired that and essentially all the works that he did at that point in time. So it's talking about what's happening internationally at the same time as what's happening in Scotland and the UK. And then finally, I think in our Gallery 3, which is Stephen Sutcliffe, who is in the collection, went to GSA and has strong connections with Glasgow, but it shows you a different kind of works and installations that we have. So that's just kind of had a wee look at the galleries as a bit of a fly through of it, and then we're going to kind of have a wee talk about some of the commissions, one of which here was commissioned in 1996 for the opening of GoMA. This is what was the cafe back then, and it's a mural by Adrian Wisniewski, one of the Glasgow boys. This was described as, or pitched as, being a slice of art heaven at the top of the building. It's not a cafe anymore. It's quite different now. We use this as a studio where we do school workshops and Saturday art club every weekend. But the mural is still there and being preserved, and it is something to see. Within Adrian's, at the same time in 1996, we did a few different commissions. So he did the cafe, and in a minute we will see the windows, but we also acquired some of his paintings. But what we also got was a neon. So sometimes we get gifts, and this was from the Glasgow print studio, because we already had a lot of Adrian's work, and this was a bit different. He hadn't really worked in neon before, and Adrian has a strong connection with colour and going straight to that source by being light. It was a very interesting work to have, especially when you have it in context of everything else of Adrian's work within the collection. And here's these windows that I was talking about. So up both sides of the windows, but this is a public stairwell, both sides of the building, we have these windows. And when GoMA first opened, rather than floors 1, 2, 3, and 4, which we talk about now, they had the fire, earth, water, and air galleries. And these, you can see here, this is the water section of the building with these lovely blue windows, and then as you go further down, they get darker into like the red and of the earth and of the fire. But I'll hand over Katie here now to talk about this.
Thanks very much, Martin. Sorry, so here we're seeing the Great Devil. Niki de Saint Phalle was French-American artist. I first saw her work when I was a student, organised in the McClellan Galleries in Glasgow. And I suppose that was a kind of, not the start of a relationship, but it really cemented a relationship with the then director of Glasgow Museums, Julian Spalding, and the artist Niki de Saint Phalle. So when Julian was proposing a great new modern art gallery in the centre of Glasgow with commissions, part of that conversation, he was thinking about how he could bring Niki back into the city. So on the one hand, following that exhibition in McClellan Galleries, we have really key works in the collection by her, so including the Great Devil, and we have Altar to a Dead Cat, which is another really important work from her shooting period. But as part of the commissioning for the building, Julian commissioned Niki to do the tympanum, which is the next slide coming up. So as part of Niki de Saint Phalle work, she's really interested in duality between good and evil. So I guess you get a sense of that from the Great Devil. It was also, a lot of her artwork was quite feminist in approach, but it was also, in some ways, she talked about it as therapy, as a way of dealing with her past traumas that she had within her life. So one of the first proposals that she had with Julian Spalding was for the outside of the building in the tympanum area. And her original idea was to have almost like a cuckoo clock, where an angel would come out at one side and then a devil would come out. So it was quite kinetic. But unfortunately, Historic Scotland wouldn't let Glasgow Museums go with that. So we have an incredible set of faxes between Niki de Saint Phalle and Julian Spalding that are in our archive, where Julian writes on headed note paper about, unfortunately, in this circumstance, Historic Scotland won't let him do anything to the outside of the building. And then you have these incredible faxes from Niki de Saint Phalle with drawings and her handwriting saying, imploring Julian to make something happen and realize it for her, because she knows her great relationship with him will make something happen good for Glasgow. And I guess through those conversations, the topic of St Mungo came up. So St Mungo is the patron saint of Glasgow, and the stories behind that were part of the reason that Niki got interested in it. There's one story about a king and a queen, and the king believes his wife has committed adultery, and he's then told to go to the river to get a fish, and out of the fish's mouth comes a ring that he'd given to his wife, and he believed that she was adulterous because she wasn't wearing the ring. And so when he got the ring back, there was that whole story in there. And I think for Niki, the story of adultery really fascinated her. So the tympanum piece that we have has St Mungo on it. So there's a real connection in with Glasgow, but also the work that Niki, or ideas that Niki was concerned with as well. And the other piece that we have is the mirrored entrance room. So when you come into GoMA, you come into a room that is almost like a mirrored mosaic cave. And this is partly based on the tarot garden that Niki was creating in Grosseto in Italy at the time, and Julian had seen this. And for his new modern art gallery in the centre of Glasgow, he wanted it otherworldly. So the mirrored entrance space, the idea was that you would pass from the outside clutter of the centre of Glasgow and then move into this otherworldly space that would have 4 floors that were designed and named after the elements as well. So when you do come into GoMA, you are met with this mirrored room. So you see lots of reflections of the outside in, but it's a transformative space. And you can just see the lights of the Jean Tinguely kinetic chandelier, which is Bischofberger 482, which, Martin was talking about ways works come into the collection. This was a gift from Niki de Saint Phalle of the work by Jean Tinguely, who she was married to and was a partner for a very long time within her career. So Martin, I'll let you move on to other works.
Thanks, Katie. So this is kind of talking about one of the commissions, but unfortunately the commission isn't in the gallery anymore. So the commission was by Andy Goldsworthy, and it was called the Clay 4. And if anybody remembers 1996 visiting, right up to 2000, it was really powerful. It was one of the first works that I ever seen that was more of an installation, and quite inspired me to go into art school and kind of thinking that way. Fortunately, that is not there anymore, but we are trying to, or we have plans to hopefully reinstate it sometime, because it can be, the clay is there and can be reinstated. But the same clay that was used for before was used for these other works that are in the collection and currently on display in Taste. So Andy, who would go into the landscape, if you don't know his work, and he kind of works with what is around him at the time. So if it's raining, he will lie down and make a silhouette of himself, or you can kind of see here on the left, there's a riverbed, and he's went in and he's carved in these circles into the riverbed and taken a photograph of it. So these kind of geometric shapes within nature. And then that same clay that he carved out of the riverbed there to make the geometric shapes, and also used for the clay floor, he used for the image or the artwork on the right hand side, which is snowball drawings. So he had 4 snowballs that he kind of makes of clay and water, freezes them, and then puts them on one side and lets them melt, and it creates this lovely abstract flow. They do kind of link back to a previous quite famous exhibition in Glasgow at Tramway, where he made massive snowballs in the middle of summer and let them melt in Tramway. And it was he's always been interested in ecology and the environment, and kind of looked at to see what the kind of the particles that are left within the snowball, when they melt, they would give off a kind of stain. So Andy Goldsworthy, we've got quite a few works of Andy in the collection, and it would be great to get that commission back out again. Just muted myself. There we go. And then this is more moving into some more recent commissions. So this one kind of bridges time to a certain extent, because Lawrence Weiner, famous American artist, came and worked with a volunteer artist-run space, Transmission, and at the time the people that were on the committee at Transmission were some of those artists we were talking about who were felt a bit aggrieved when GoMA opened. Christine Boland, Douglas Gordon, all those kind of artists, but when Lawrence came over, they all had a great connection, and he kept on having conversations with them, and ended up having another couple of shows or sending works over, and they were remained friends, a lot of them, for all the years later. And it kind of loops back now to this commission, which was kind of adjacent to, we got £1 million funding award from art fund called Art Fund International, and this wasn't part of that, but the research kind of connected to Lawrence, and we did it separate to it, and that part of that fund was to collect international artworks for regional museums outside London. But this artwork, kind of, because it was a commission and site specific, it kind of ended up being out with the timescale for that. So I ended up picking this up after Ben Harmon and Katrina Brown had really picked up the ball and got most of the way with it. And it was a real pleasure to be working with Lawrence, who's sadly passed now. But we have these statements along the way, come what may, and somewhere, somehow, carved into the stone steps 4 times around GoMA, and Lawrence wanted it so that they were kind of just dotted or scattered around. GoMA is slightly on a plinth in itself, as Lawrence spoke about it. So there's kind of these 2 steps up to it, and then there's a couple more steps to get into GoMA. And he wanted people to have that idea of, they would maybe see these words as they went and commuted to work, and they would maybe start to think about themselves about, like, oh, along this way or somewhere, somehow, kind of ruminate on, maybe take them away in a wee daydream on their day. Or if they were coming to GoMA, have that kind of idea of having that same daydream, but then coming in and having your mind prepped for coming in to see artwork, which, funnily enough, is kind of the same ethos that Niki was trying to do with the mirrored room that Katie was talking about, that kind of gateway from the real world outside and then going in to see artwork. So we're really pleased to be one of the few cities to have a permanent Lawrence Weiner public work around. And this is known as Katie's.
Hi, so this is an artwork, Old Money, by the Glasgow-based artist James Rigler. And I guess what we've talked about, particularly with commissions for the building, is a way of working with an artist that responds to histories of the building or the location and the city itself. So this commission with James Rigler came about because in 2020, during the COVID pandemic, the Contemporary Art Society were still working with their awards and grants for acquiring artworks. And although we were close to the public, it was one way that Martin and I felt that we could support artists living and working in the city by applying for different acquisition awards that were available to us at the time. So we were successful in getting the Jackson Tang Ceramics Award from the Contemporary Art Society in 2020. And I and Martin had both visited James Rigler in probably about 2015 and done a studio visit with him at that time, but the right opportunity had never kind of come up. And so when the Jackson Tang Award came for ceramics, it felt like a really good moment to revisit that conversation with James, but also think about something that we could have semi-permanently in the building in GoMA, and also knowing that the exhibition Domestic Bliss, which looked at the different histories of GoMA, firstly as a house for the tobacco lord William Cunningham, who made his money on the back of enslaved people through initially tobacco and then sugar. Once he'd sold the house, it became a royal bank. And then in the early 1800s, there was a decision to turn it into the Royal Exchange with a big architectural commission from the architect David Hamilton. And so the building that you saw right at the beginning is the remainder, well, is the main alterations that happened to create the Royal Exchange, with additions going upwards and less noticeable in 1996 to turn it into GoMA. So James was really fascinated by this history, but also that idea and pomp and circumstance of what money does and how it kind of lays its claim to an area in the city that was once called the Cow Loan. So GoMA is built on the outskirts, which was farmland. But also, as an artist and a ceramic artist, he's really interested in ceramic process, but he's also worked in country houses and looking at craftspeople. And often we remember the name of the architect, something like David Hamilton, but we do not remember the names, or the names aren't noted, of all the craftspeople that did the architectural carvings and architraves and the decoration that is across our building. So James was really thinking about playing with that, but thinking about but also thinking about the idea of money and, what Glasgow was trying to do at the time with its new money that it made on the back of enslaved peoples through the empire. And James has these works are ceramics, but he's also looked at using furniture techniques. So they're kind of gilded ceramics. So in some ways they don't look like ceramics, they look like quite precious metal objects. He has also taken certain forms and repeated them and put them together into almost like contemporary emoji shapes, or you can just sort of see the roof of a house, or a tympanum, or a sausage, or a winking emoji eye. And so on the one level, he's looking at quite difficult histories within the building, and at the other level, he's kind of almost like poking fun at the pomposity of architecture and grandeur of the space, but also creating a really fun and beautifully constructed architrave that kind of sits in the exhibition Domestic Bliss. So again, it tied in really lovely with the theme of that exhibition, which is drawn from across our collection and incredible treasures that we have. But that bit where you scratch against the surface of something quite beautiful and layers of different stories kind of appear from underneath it. And so, as I was saying, Martin was talking about working with Lawrence, a really close relationship with an artist that enables you to do really exciting commissions, which then become acquisitions for the collection.
Okay, and I know we're just on time, but we have one more slide and one more commission, so hopefully you can stay with us, but also, since we raced through that you understood our Scottish accents, if anybody who isn't from Glasgow or Scotland. So this is the last commission we want to talk about, kind of just connected there actually, because it was roughly the same time, and also supported by Contemporary Art Society. So way back at the start, when we were talking about Domestic Bliss, I pointed out two paintings in the background, the kind of pink ones. They're quite far back and looked a bit cartoonish, but they were actually of two houses. And that was a work by Rabia Razi, and this is the third work. So we managed to acquire these three works during the first lockdown from a resilience fund, as said, by Contemporary Art Society. And what was great is we had been looking at Rabia's work previously, about maybe 2018, from the show in Transmission. And again, we're looking for opportunities, ways of working, and sometimes it can take years, or longer or shorter than others. And the Resilience Fund, when we looked at what they were looking for, it was kind of perfect. One, it wanted to support a kind of emerging artist, but also it wanted to maybe have a reflection on COVID or the pandemic. And these works were obviously made pre that, and they still hold all those, everything that the artist meant for that. So, for example, the paintings are of houses, but it was about mental health and about racism and lots of different things packed in there. But obviously, we were all kind of essentially locked inside our houses. So they spoke about that. And then this work here, Mazir. So this is actually Rabia's dad's name, and when she first installed it back in 2018, when it was first shown, she was talking about how names like her dad's aren't seen in public. They're not really seen especially up in a public space. And also her dad used to have a clothing shop and spoke a wee bit about that idea of having shops or having kind of in that kind of people coming over, immigrants coming over and setting up shops and setting up businesses. So that's why kind of using the neon as well to kind of talk about that. And then obviously during the pandemic, then corner shops and shops became almost frontline workers and became really important to everyone. They were a great lifeline. So this was acquired during the first pandemic, and then managed to be installed, and then there was a second lockdown. And what was a difficult time for everyone, what was really sweet about that was the fact that Rabia was saying that nobody really sees her dad's name or names like her dad's up in lights, but for those weeks and months that the building was closed, this was beaming out of the front window just as an artwork, but also as a statement and also as a beacon for everyone over that time. So it kind of, for me, it really felt that it really chimed with what the original intent of the work was, but also at that time and the context. And it still has this, obviously we've passed on that and we're luckily away from all there, but the work itself is still bringing on new meaning and has been seen by quite literally millions of people now by the name. And also a nice little adjunct to that when we're thinking about who we're collecting or what we're picking up. Rabia actually did her school placement in GoMA back in 1997. So that's she essentially wasn't. You have school placements in secondary school to see where you may or may not want to work or go on to, and she did it in GoMA, and that original collection that we were talking about, and she was really inspired by that. So it's really a nice kind of full circle to a certain extent of how that collection has inspired younger artists and people that come in, and now she is in the collection and we are hopefully working with her again in the future and continuing relationships with them as we do with all our artists and its ongoing conversations. So that was a bit of a fly through of some commissions and some works that you'll be able to see in GoMA if you come and see us. We can see here again, we're back to the building. You can see Niki's working with Tempenham, and you can see our last show, Banksy, which was obviously pretty big, but we also have Beagles and Ramsey coming up in October, and we've got Sam Ainsley opening in November. So it's a great exhibitions if you are around and you can come to. Okay, well, thanks very much.
Thank you for our Scottish accents.
That is, probably overrun a wee bit. So thanks for sticking with us. And if that's no more questions, I think that's us time to say bye. And and hope that you come and visit GoMA.
Thank you very much. Okay. Sorry, and thank you very much to Art UK for inviting us, and thank you for all the lovely comments that I can see pinging up in the chat. I'm glad you enjoyed listening to us, and yeah, as Martin says, it would be lovely to see you in our museum at some point.